Welcome to the Heartland Author Podcast. I'm Aaron Apollo Camp. For the first time on this podcast, I had the honor of interviewing an author whose book I have read part of. Today's episode features my interview of Andy Straka, the author of Split City, A Jesus Spares Mystery. I'm here with Andy Straka. I apologize if I mispronounced your name incorrectly.
You nailed it.
Andy is the author of Split City, A Jesus Spares Mystery. Andy, welcome to the Heartland Author Podcast.
Thanks, Aaron. I appreciate you having me on.
For my first question, feel free to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Sure. I've been writing for a number of years. This is my 11th novel. And my first 3 books were published by Penguin Putnam in New York, and part of a Private Eye series, the Frank Pavlicek series, and A Witness Above is still probably the best known book of mine, my first book that I wrote, which has been a few years ago now, but still managed to sell a few books. And since then, I've written a number of other, some thrillers and suspense novels. I have a degree from Williams College in English and an MFA, which has sort of altered some of the direction of my writing. I took a hiatus from writing fiction about 4 or 5 years ago for a number of reasons. Due to a cancer diagnosis, I'm a cancer survivor and really very thankful for that. And decided to ghost write a memoir at that time, which turned out to be a much bigger and longer project than I anticipated. So this is my first novel that's been out in 5 years, and it was a lot of fun writing it. I'm actually working on the second in the series now.
It's fantastic that you survived cancer. Now, this interview is going to be primarily about your book, Split City, which is a bowling-themed mystery novel. I've read the first 14 chapters of it, and I look forward to reading the rest of it after our interview. But without spoiling too much of the book, what is Split City about?
Split City is, I think, one of a good tagline, and I don't know how many people are familiar with these products, but it's Yada Yada Prayer Group meets the Big Lebowski. It is a completely fictional county in the Catskills of upstate New York, which is not too far from where I grew up, and it is a book about identical twin brothers. In the opening of the book, Billy Gills, who's a former Pro Bowler, they're both former Pro Bowlers. Billy's called to the morgue to identify the body of his twin brother. But as you see when you read the book, there's a lot more to the story than that. And I won't throw in too many spoilers, but the book is populated with a number of interesting characters and interesting scenes that completely for my imagination. And as I say, I had a great time writing it and spending time with these characters. It is completely, unlike some of my previous fiction, it is completely G-rated. And, so it's safe for all of you Agatha Christie readers out there or people who enjoy that sort of fiction. But it also has, a slight edge to it in the sense that it is a mystery. There's a murder, of course, and there's some discussion of various forensic things and so forth. But again, my previous fiction, and that I continue to write with some other projects, is quite different than this. And this was, to some degree, my therapy during the pandemic. I needed to write something a little different, and I've been very thankful and pleased how it's turned out.
As your book has a tenpin bowling theme to it, have you ever watched bowling on television?
Oh, of course, sure. It's a good pastime sometimes when there's nothing else on to sit and watch. I don't bowl much anymore due to some physical issues, but I grew up bowling, and this book, to some degree, I didn't put a dedication there, but if I were to dedicate it, would be to my parents, who are both deceased now. But they were both bowlers, and they took us bowling every Sunday. Not every Sunday, but a lot of Sundays after church, and it was, and that's kind of the impetus behind this, and it's something that it's not a bowling book per se. It's a mystery. It's a character driven novel, but bowling is a backdrop of it, and Billy owns Split City is the struggling small lane, bowling alley lanes that he owns in a small town, in a small lakeside resort town.
You said that you grew up not too far from the Catskills of New York. Do you happen to know anyone from the Catskills of New York who was by the name of Charles Hance, as he was a government class professor I had in junior college who grew up in that part of New York State as well?
No, I'm sorry, that name's not familiar.
Okay. I'm going to move on to the next question. Sticking with the bowling theme here, do you have a favorite professional bowler in real life?
No, not really. I enjoy watching some of the, like I say, it's entertaining at times. It's a sport. My primary sport was basketball. I played college basketball, Division III, many years ago. I tell my kids whom I've coached in the prehistoric era, because I preceded the 3-point shot when I was playing in college, believe it or not. So that dates me a little bit. But bowling has always been something, when I've done it as recreation, I've enjoyed, and occasionally watch some pro tournaments for a little bit. But no, I don't really follow it avidly. Maybe I shouldn't be writing this book. I'm a little ashamed to admit that, but it's really more about recreational bowling than it is about the pro tour. Although Billy may return to a few tournaments, there may be some scenes, particularly in some backstory scenes, that show Billy and Bo at some pro tournaments. And I have a few friends that are into bowling, one in particular, and have been my sources in that regard.
Now, is Split City self-published or traditionally published?
Well, that's an interesting question. Split City is published, technically it's traditionally published. However, situation with a gentleman who's the former vice president of Thomas Nelson Publishers, and he does a few books like this, mostly nonfiction actually, but so it's kind of a cooperative thing. It's not the same as some of my other traditionally published books. As far as the distribution, the printing and everything, it is a traditionally published book, but it's different in the sense that I had a lot more to say, and actually a lot more a financial commitment up front, not in terms of like a vanity publisher or like the traditional self-publishing. This is quite different, but it's typically there are most of his authors who've published with him, and he's done over 500 books in the last 15 years. Most of them are people like myself who've been around a while and sort of know the ropes and know the ins and outs of it. And I have in the past self-published a couple of books as well, so I've kind of seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of publishing. I've published with small press, Big Five, traditional, as well as independently, and I have respect for all of those venues and formats. Every project's different. I still technically have an agent in New York that I will. I haven't had much communication with them recently, but I will, continue to try to, at times, fish the waters of larger fish. But as you know, there's been a lot of changes in the publishing world over the last 10 years, and everybody's aware of that. And I have a great deal of respect for people who've, enjoying great success in indie publishing, because I think it's a good trend in the same way indie films have made a big impact in the film world.
And the next question I have, and this is from reading the first part of your book. A little ways into the book, there's a fight scene that occurs at a bowling alley that was kicked off by somebody getting a bowling ball dropped on their foot. Was there any real life inspiration behind that?
No, that's totally made up. I just, in fact, that was one of the funny scenes. I thought of doing a prequel just around that scene. I may go back at some point and do that. It's called, it was this, at the Split Down the Middle conference, and it was just poking fun at a lot of just a lot of our public media and politicians and people. And it's Billy's brother, who is a successful bowling shoe manufacturer, believe it or not, who Billy Bo Gills, the inventor of the famous tread bow bowling shoes, which are like Michael. This is all in my book, but he's has the bright idea of trying to bring together the state government and both sides and have this big weekend conference where they're all going to get together and not really talk politics or anything, just have fun. But unfortunately, it kind of degenerates into in the middle of bowling, actually. So into something that ends up being known as the Great American Food Fight. But I'll try not to do any more spoilers. But
Okay, if you have a typical writing routine, what is your typical writing routine?
oh heavens, I I wish I did. I mostly do. I mostly work a regular schedule, but I have found over the years that my actual productive writing time, just in general, is only about 2 or 3 hours a day. Beyond that, it tends to go downhill. Sometimes I can go longer, particularly if I'm on deadline or something. I can crank it out. But so, do I have a regular schedule? Sure, I show up most days, most days in the office here, which is on my property, up the hill from my house, and close the door and sit down and go to work. And oftentimes I'll be maybe doing research or working on some book promotion or other things, but I will dedicate some time to say, okay, this is my writing time. I need to be working on this. Currently, I'm working on 3 or 4 projects at once, which is not the most comfortable work environment for me. Some of these are long-time projects that I've been pushing up the ball up the hill for quite a while. But yeah, so my routine, that's my routine, if it is a routine. And I kind of take my inspiration from, I think it was William Faulkner, the famous quote that said, he said he only wrote when he was inspired. And fortunately, he was inspired every morning at 9 a.m. and so I sort of take a lunch pail, blue collar approach to it. Sometimes it stinks and I just keep going, and sometimes I feel it's going well and I just keep rolling. But I do think that anybody who is writing seriously develops some sort of a routine where on a regular basis, whether it's daily or several times a week or whatever, that you're sitting down and devoting that time to creative energies and as I say, pushing the balls up the hill. If you're writing shorter fiction, then that's a little bit different. But
now, you kind of answered this a little bit moments ago, but you said you were working on like a few different writing projects. Could you elaborate a little more on that?
Well, these are manuscripts that have been on my computer for some time. One of the next Pavlicek novel in my best-selling Pavlicek series, and I've been struggling with that. I had my current publisher with that. After Penguin dropped the series, then I was able to get the rights back, and there's another publisher involved now, and they're wonderful people. And the people I dealt with at Penguin were all great too. I have nothing but good to say. I've been very fortunate and had great editors and great people to work with. So that's one of the projects. But I had the last time I tried to crank out a manuscript right when I was in the middle of my cancer diagnosis and treatment 4 or 5 years ago, and it was not up to par. And the publisher graciously, kindly said, "Well, I don't think we should put this out," and it was the nicest rejection I ever got, particularly since they'd already published my other books. But so that's something that I'm still working on, and worked on a little bit through my master's degree that I chose to get just for a teaching credit. But anyway, so that's one, and then there's some different genres. There's a spy thriller that I'm working on with actually a co-author who's a former Marine intelligence officer. That's a much more intense project. I published. This was a self-publishing effort back in 2014-15. Acquaintance of mine who's a screenwriter and I created a series called Dragonflies, which is about mini drones. And the main character, Reina Sanchez, is a former Army helicopter pilot. So that is begging for the third and final book in the trilogy to be completed. It's been sitting there for quite some time, and we're trying to sell the screenplay. And my co-author, that's his specialty, he created the screenplay, and he thought he had 2 or 3 producers at Paramount that were interested, but that all fell apart, and as often happens in those kind of projects. So it's kind of sat dormant for a while. But so those are 2 of the projects. There's another one that is a sort of a near future, somewhat dystopian, sort of YA new adult novel, which is a different thing for me. And I worked on some of that in my master's degree, and it's a completely different from my other projects. So they're all there. I work at them at various times. I do have a deadline that I have to meet for the current publisher with the Split City series. The next book in the series is called Split End, and so that I need to. That's kind of at the top of my priority list at the moment, due to a deadline.
Well, Andy, that'll conclude our interview. Thank you for appearing on the Heartland Author Podcast.
Thanks very much for having me.
I enjoyed interviewing Andy Straka, and I look forward to reading the rest of Split City. I am pleased to announce that with this interview being the final one on this podcast in 2021, the Heartland Author Podcast had a 100% participation rate from guests. I thank every one of the guests who have appeared on this podcast in this calendar year, and I hope to interview many more authors, writers, and other people in the writing industry in 2022. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to write your imagination, even if you can't bowl a 300. Bye for now. You can learn more about me and my book writing projects at authoraac.wordpress.com. You can also follow me on Facebook and Twitter at authoraac. You can also watch videos on the Heartland Author channel on YouTube. Copyright 2021, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of its audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this podcast episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.